Hey everybody, hope you're all doing well. Tonight's topic are the Fenians. Who were the Fenians, the dastardly Fenians? What did they do and why did they do it, and why is it important for us to look at it today? All right, let's talk about who the Fenians were. The Fenians were an Irish brotherhood whose goal was to help throw off the yoke of English control in the country, the island of Ireland. The Fenian Brotherhood existed both in Ireland but also in North America, and we were going to talk about the North American branch and their activities and how it's related to Canadian history. Just a brief little talk about Irish history. The English, originally the Normans, who conquered England in 1066 AD, and eventually they kind of turned into the English. They arrive in Ireland in the early 12th century, from the 12th to the 16th century, under the Normans, the English, the Tudors, Cromwell. The Irish people are controlled and subjugated by the English. In 1801, there's an Act of Union, which makes Ireland part of the United Kingdom. That sparks years of sectarian violence and civil war, including a war of independence. Part of Ireland does successfully separate, and violence continues on into the 1980s. So this is a very charged topic. And if you know anybody who's Irish, they probably already know about this history and can tell you a whole lot about it. We also want to talk very briefly about the Great Potato Famine of 1845 to 1849, which resulted in a great deal of migration out of Ireland into North America, particularly the northern U.S. states, and of course into Canada as well. So there's a large contingent of Irish nationalists in the United States. So 1860 to 1864, there is this horrific U.S. Civil War where the northern states get in a war against the southern states, primarily over slavery, but there are many other factors at play. So there are a large number of Irish Americans who fight in the U.S. Civil War and become battle-hardened soldiers. And we're now 1864, everything is over, and you've got a bunch of these soldiers who are battle-hardened, trained, militarily equipped, now turning their eye towards something else. And during the American Civil War, Britain, while technically neutral, allowed many of its companies to do business with the Confederacy, sell them ships, buy their cotton, and it helped to keep the war going and help to support the Confederacy. And of course, the winning side, the North, was not happy with that, although everybody kind of pretended that it didn't really happen. But the Irish, of course, would have been, aware of this as well. So this brings us to the Fenian Brotherhood, whose stated goal was to release Ireland from the yoke of the English, and they would do anything they would to help support, preferably in their mind, a violent revolution to overthrow the English and for Ireland to have its own rule. So a bunch of these Fenians are in North America, in the northern U.S., and they set upon themselves a plan to harass and raid into British North America, which is what we now think about as Ontario and Quebec, right along that current U.S.-Canadian border, as well as some of the areas in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. And their goal is to harass the British, to draw their attention away from Ireland, which hopefully in their mind will help the Irish be able to start a civil war and get their independence. And there's also at this time a lot of thought about the British North American colonies becoming part of the United States, as opposed to remaining British nationals. So all of this is sort of brewing as time marches on here. So the Fenians begin to get organized and they begin to raid into British North America, in particular June of 1866. So this is just shortly after the U.S. Civil War ends. The Battle of Ridgeway, which is just outside of Fort Erie, one of the more famous early battles of the Fenian raids. And the British, the small contingent of British military, as well as the Canadian militia, were not very well prepared. The militia in particular were not well trained. They were not well equipped, which allowed the Fenians to be a little more successful. So this continued on for almost 6 years, where the Fenians would raid into Canada to try to cause these the goal of Irish nationalism. Of course, it didn't really ever work. People died, battles were fought, but there are some really important factors that came out of these Fenian raids, some consequences that are really important. First of all, number one, it helped to steel the resolve of the various colonists to organize their own defense, not to rely on the British regulars. Up to this point, the safety of the colonies was basically guaranteed by the British military, and there was a small contingent of militia, but they were not well trained. They were not well armed. They certainly weren't armed by anybody official. It was whatever they happened to have, whether it was a musket or their pitchfork or something like that. So seeing these Fenians come across the border and causing these problems, the first thing it did was it really demonstrated to the colonists that they needed to organize themselves, they needed to train their militia better, and they needed to start looking after themselves. So this, of course, was useful for themselves, and it also got the British off the hook to some degree in terms of having to defend the border. It was also a major factor in many of the colonists in British North America at the time, firming their resolve to remain as either British subjects or, more importantly, not to become Americans. There was lots of talk at this time about American hegemony. The Americans are moving shortly after this, when the Civil War is over. The Americans start this massive push westward and literally take over all of that territory, all the way out to the Pacific Ocean, all the way up to the North Pacific, excuse me, as well. So there were lots of people in British North America who had considered becoming part of the United States, and this certainly helped to solve that problem and to bring about among the colonists and the leadership in the colonies a desire for something different. And that leads us to the next point. The Fenian raids were a major factor that contributed to Canadian Confederation. There had been lots of talks, excuse me, leading up to this time about the colonies, the British colonies, forming into some sort of union of their own, led, of course, by John A. Macdonald and George Etienne Cartier in Quebec. But there wasn't necessarily a lot of momentum. There was a lot of discussion about what was good and what wasn't good. The maritime provinces in particular needed to be convinced. They weren't necessarily sure that it was best for them to become part of a whole new country and have to do all these things on their own, as opposed to being part of the British Empire, continuing to be part of the British Empire. But the Fenian raids were a huge factor, and there are several prominent Canadian historians who feel that the Fenian raids actually tipped the balance in helping New Brunswick and Nova Scotia in particular to agree and join Confederation with the United Province of Canada, which ended up forming on July 1st, 1867, yay, July 1st, the country of Canada. So that's what the Fenian raids did. They helped steel the resolve of the colonists to look after themselves better. They helped steel the resolve of the colonists to not want to become part of the United States. So no 51st state. And it was a major factor that led to Canadian Confederation. And in 1867, Canada was formed, and it encompassed at that time what is now Quebec and Ontario, but only small portions of it, and New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. And yet by 1905, in part thanks to the Cross-Canada Railway that was built, by 1905, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, British Columbia, and Prince Edward Island would join Confederation, and shortly thereafter, you had the country pretty much as we see it now, and Newfoundland and Labrador joined in 1949. So those were the Fenians. They set out goals to disrupt Britain and to get an independent Ireland, and instead they contributed to an independent country of Canada, which remains an independent country of Canada today. All right, that's it for the Fenians. I hope you enjoyed that. Continue to read, continue to learn, and take care of yourself.